Tens of thousands of unaccompanied children
from Central America.
From El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala.
President Obama has requested an additional $3.7 billion from Congress.
You've heard about the Central American kids fleeing to the U.S., escaping violence. But for Mexican children doing the same thing, it's a different story. The U.S. system to identify and help Mexican children at risk isn't working.
Cada rato que se pelea una mafia con otra, se balacean, muertos, es todo. La mayoría de mis amigos estaban metidos en mafia. A mí me dijeron que si le entraba luego, le dije que no estaba loco yo para entrar a esa cosa. Nada más me quieren convencer de que yo entre con ellos.
Esteban's 17. He's not from Honduras, El Salvador, or Guatemala. He lives just 2 hours from the Arizona border in Mexico.
A un amigo mío, bueno, se lo llevaron de su casa, desapareció y lo encontraron al mes debajo de un mezquite, hecho pedazos. El que comete un error en la mafia, pues ya no.
Like those Central American children, Esteban decided to try his luck escaping to the U.S. With swathes of Mexico resembling war zones, he's just one of thousands fleeing every year. U.S. law promises a shot at protection to all children in danger. They could get asylum or a special visa to stay north of the border. Central American children have the right to make their case in court, but when Border Patrol caught Esteban, he was sent straight back to Mexico. Why was he treated differently? Maru Cortázar has worked on child migration with nonprofit Appleseed for years.
Para Estados Unidos y la ley de trata, México es un país contiguo. Tengo la frontera, estamos aquí justamente, entonces yo simplemente veo, no tienes documentos, te regreso inmediatamente.
Unaccompanied Central American children detained by Border Patrol are automatically sent on into protective custody. Then they have the right, by law, to tell their story to an immigration judge who decides if they get to stay or are sent back. For Mexican children to get into that same protective system, they have to convince a Border Patrol agent on the spot it's not safe for them to return to Mexico. Otherwise, they're sent right back. Brian Flowers is from Border Patrol. The law makes it their job to interview Mexican children to see if they stay in the U.S. or go back south.
We typically would not try to keep them in our facilities, long, in that process, like say, definitely like say within a shift. I know for us, we have to usually have them out within 72-hour time frame, but they're always usually out way, like a whole lot sooner than that.
In that tight time frame, the Trafficking Victims Protection Law says Border Patrol is supposed to check 3 things with a Mexican child. They aren't victims of trafficking, they don't have a credible fear of returning, and they're willing to return voluntarily to Mexico. That might seem okay on paper, but in reality, Border Patrol often fails to do this screening at all, and kids just don't trust them.
Fueron 12 días en el desierto.
Pasé alrededor de 13 días caminando.
Fue entonces cuando nos agarraron y todos así fuertes y como que si te iban a hacer algo.
Me apunté con un arma y
me jalaron de los pies. Ya nos llevaron allá a la cárcel.
Siempre estuve encerrado en un cuarto y solo.
Me hicieron algunas preguntas.
¿Tu nombre, tu edad, de dónde eres?
¿A qué parte iba y con quién? Si tenía algún familiar y ya. Pues.
No me dicen nada, simplemente me dicen firma acá, firma acá.
Pero todo estaba en inglés, no sabía qué era.
Ya estaba encerrado, dije, pues ya que más me queda por regresar para México.
This is how Esteban and thousands of other Mexican children are sent straight back every year. But a United Nations report found that 59% of Mexican children cited violence as a reason for leaving. In 2013, only 4.5% got to make their case for protection in the U.S. All the rest are pushed back through the Mexican consulate, the migration agency, and end up at a government-run shelter, like this one in Nogales, Mexico.
Hemos tenido aquí hasta 105 chicos. O sea, sí, nuestros números son fuertes.
This child services shelter is one of the busiest on the border.
La misión, primeramente, es atenderlos, sus necesidades básicas en cuanto llegan. Y el fin de nosotros es reintegrarlos con su familia, porque no nos podemos quedar con todos aquí en la frontera.
This is the last stop in the system where children have a chance to speak out if they're scared of going home, whether that's because of organized crime or domestic abuse. But few get asked, and even fewer open up. Sandra Mendoza from the Mexican Foreign Ministry admits vulnerable kids are slipping through the system.
Well, I think that the numbers might be speaking from themselves. What I believe is that we haven't been able so far to assess the cases.
In fact, many of these children are being exploited by organized crime. Some are coerced into smuggling drugs or people across the border. These so-called circuit children, niños de circuito, can be pushed around this deportation system over and over again.
Niños de circuito is around 30% of all the kids that we repatriate. It is a big problem, and we are concerned.
With no real help from authorities, they're trapped.
The reality is that there are no efficient programs in either side of the border right now to really help them to get out of this circle of violence that they are living on.
Despite laws designed to help minors fleeing violence, too often Mexican children don't get heard or helped.
Hablamos de miles de niños de Honduras, de Guatemala, de El Salvador, de México. Cada historia es diferente y nos debe de mover el querer saber qué está pasando con ese niño.
The U.S. and Mexican governments should make sure these children are properly screened. Otherwise, they'll just keep sending them back to danger. 24 hours after arriving, Esteban's free to leave the shelter. His mom is there to pick him up. They meet with a social worker.
Se lo vamos a entregar el día de hoy. Esperemos, como le digo, que sea la última vez que estés con nosotros, que no se vuelva a repetir.
Esteban barely says a word, and no one asks if he'll be safe from the gangs that threatened him back home.
Se acabó, ya vas para México otra vez a lo mismo. No, pues saben, la verdad no veo futuro ahí donde estamos.